Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to today's curatorial talk. My name is Chasitie Brown, and I am the former Dido and Baron Kidd McDermott Intern Fellow for European Art at the DMA. I'm also the curator of the exhibition Dali's Divine Comedy, which is the subject of today's presentation. I hope you all have the opportunity to see the show, and for those that haven't, this talk will give you some background information on the exhibition. Today's presentation will be divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I'll give you some personal insight as to how I arrived at this project, as well as a brief overview of the exhibition itself. In the second part, I'll go over some key art historical context to the show. Finally, in the third segment of this presentation, I'll walk you through some of the key works in this exhibition. Every year in the past, the McDermott Intern for European Art has been given this incredible opportunity to curate a small show of works on paper in the European Gallery. These shows draw from the department's permanent collection, and they always take place in this designated space in the galleries that you see here on the screen. This is an installation photograph of the previous show, Violence and Defiance, which was curated by my predecessor, Kelsey. As you can see, this is a small, intimate space that really allows for close looking. Now, the space is quite transformed with the installation of my exhibition, Dali's Divine Comedy. The show features 13 prints from Salvador Dalí's illustrations of the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is a long narrative poem that was written by medieval Florentine poet Dante Alighieri in 1320. It follows the main protagonist, Dante's journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven in search of salvation. The Italian government commissioned Dali in 1950 to illustrate the Divine Comedy for the occasion of Dante's 700th birthday anniversary. However, the commission was quickly revoked as it caused quite the controversy among the Italian community. Some of them believed that an Italian rather than Spanish artist should be responsible for illustrating this text. Others objected to having Dali, who is a self-proclaimed surrealist devoid of all morals, to represent this religious narrative. Nonetheless, Dali persisted through with this project, and from 1951 to 1963, he completed 100 watercolor illustrations for this narrative. These watercolors were later transferred to wood-engraved prints with the assistance of his French printer. Dali's illustrations of the Divine Comedy were made during a moment in his career where he formally renounced himself from the Surrealist art movement. As some of you may know, Dali is best known for his contributions to Surrealism. Surrealism was a 20th century art and literature movement that was first formed in Paris in 1920. It was in part an artistic response to the atrocities demonstrated in World War I. The Surrealist artists were particularly influenced by psychoanalytic theory and took an interest in Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung's works. They were really interested in visually expressing the unconscious states of the mind, which they often achieved by using juxtaposing imagery in their compositions. Here on the screen is an example of a surrealist painting that we have at the DMA. It is by the Spanish artist Oscar Dominguez, who worked in Paris. You can see these strange otherworldly creatures that are contrasted by this familiar dark landscape. While Dali was known for his surrealist landscapes with the juxtaposing imagery, he was deeply affected by the atrocities of World War II, especially the U.S. bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After these horrendous events, Dali took an interest in classical and religious subjects such as the Divine Comedy. So now we'll turn our attention to some of the key works featured in Dali's Divine Comedy. One of the major themes in the exhibition is the interaction between text and image. Dali provided illustrations for every 100 cantos or passages in the Divine Comedy. It would be close to impossible, or at least very difficult, to visually represent every detail of the Divine Comedy. Dali had to make decisions about what to and what not to illustrate. there are also instances in which Dali departs from the narrative and illustrates something completely different from the text. All these decisions reveal a great deal about how Dali visually interpreted this text. The exhibition, Dali's Divine Comedy, begins with Dali's depictions of hell. Here on the screen is the first print that starts the show. The Departure for a Great Journey illustrates the first canto of the Divine Comedy. In this section, Dante describes how he is lost in a dark forest and is confronted by several wild beasts. During his terror, he sees Virgil, who is the ancient Roman poet. He is Dante's guide for hell and purgatory. Virgil tells Dante that in order to escape from the forest, he must make a journey through the three Christian otherworlds: hell, purgatory, and heaven. Both Dante and Virgil follow a straight path that's illuminated by the sun to escape the forest. As you can see, Dali interprets the scene quite differently. He places little visual emphasis on the forest which he represents in the corner. The wild beasts described in Dante's account are absent. Instead, Dali draws his attention to the path that Virgil and Dante take. You can see Virgil, who is wearing a red cloak, walking the path that is represented by two lines that converge in the background. There is really a sense of emptiness of space that makes their journey seem more ominous and haunting. We can begin to conjecture that Dali is interested in highlighting the unknowns of this journey. Here's another print from hell entitled Men Who Devour One Another. This might be one of my favorite prints from the exhibition. Like the previous illustration, Dali maintains an interest in depicting hell as a desolate, empty landscape. This print corresponds to the passage in Dante's text that recounts Dante and Virgil's encounter with the two sinners who commit sins of counterfeit. Dali represents these sinners as formless shapes. One of them is biting another as they both slide down from this rectangular platform. Now we arrive at Purgatory, which is the second section of Dante's Divine Comedy and also the second section of this exhibition. Purgatory is the world between hell and heaven. It is meant to give souls an opportunity to correct their sins so that they may gain admittance into heaven. One of the first characters that Dante and Virgil encounter in this realm is the fallen angel of Purgatory. Here we can see how Dali visually reinterprets this character as a winged angel with jaws extended from its body. This illustration really exemplifies Dali's interest in psychoanalytic theory. Dali once described the human body as being full of secret drawers that only psychoanalysis was able to open. Dali seems to suggest that by exploring these drawers through psychoanalysis, one may discover their secret desires so that they may purge them and gain repentance. Here is another representation from Purgatory entitled Avarice and Prodigality. This illustration corresponds with Dante's passage in Purgatory that describes the sin of greed, which can be corrected through virtuous acts. It is interesting to note how Dali borrows visual techniques from both hell and heaven to represent the scene. The red radial lines on the ground are also visual tropes that Dali used to illustrate scenes from hell. Similarly, these watercolor forms that make up the body of Virgil and Dante emulate a lot of the visual themes that characterize Dali's depictions of heaven, which we will see here in a minute. The exhibition ends with Dali's illustrations of paradise, the last realm in Dante's Divine Comedy. Dante is led by Beatrice, who symbolizes divine love through this realm. They both visit different souls throughout the planetary cosmos. Dali employs one of his favorite tropes to represent these scenes: rhinoceros horns. These tiny geometric forms that you see making up the bodies of Dante and Beatrice, who are depicted in this scene, are supposed to emulate rhinoceros horns, as according to Dali. Dali developed a peculiar interest in these forms during the later stages of his career. He referred to them as his angelic representations. Here you can see in another illustration from heaven, the six-fiered Jupiter, these tiny rhinoceros horns again. Beatrice and Dante stand on the clouds in the corner and watch the celestial angels gracefully roam throughout the sky. These angels, which are almost indistinguishable, are composed with Dali's rhinoceros horns. As you can see from this presentation, Dali employs different visual strategies to represent each other world in Dante's Divine Comedy. These different visual aesthetics reveal Dali's own unique surrealist interpretation to this text. Dali reimagines hell as an empty landscape crawling with strange creatures. Purgatory is represented as a mixture between visual properties of hell and heaven. It also represents Dali's engagement with psychoanalysis. Finally, heaven is imagined as a rich, colorful, and imaginative place where celestial angels are composed with Dali's rhinoceros horns. I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. I had a lot of fun creating this exhibition, and I'm really excited that I had this opportunity to share it with you on this virtual platform. And thank you once again for tuning in, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.